My name is Henry Lawson. I'm 71 years old, a retired high school history teacher from Ohio, and until recently I believed that patience, kindness, and giving people the benefit of the doubt would always lead to peace in a family, but that belief shattered the day my daughter-in-law hid my medication to teach me a lesson, a cruel act that not only endangered my life, but also exposed the truth about how she really felt about me. Everything started when my son Mark brought his wife Jenna to live with me temporarily while they got on their feet, but as the weeks turned into months, it became painfully clear that Jenna resented the fact that I existed in the same home. She was polite when my son was around, but the moment he stepped out, her entire face changed, cold eyes, irritated expressions, loud sighs when I walked into a room, and condescending comments like, "Maybe it's time for assisted living. Henry, or old people shouldn't be living alone anyway." And I ignored most of it because I didn't want to cause trouble for my son, who loved her deeply. I've always managed my own health well. I take heart medication every morning. Nothing too serious, just something to keep my blood pressure steady, but the pills are essential, and I keep them organized in a small container that I've used for years. One Friday morning, I reached for my medication like I always do, but the container was gone from the shelf above the sink. I looked in every cabinet, every drawer, even under the table, thinking maybe I had misplaced it, but it was nowhere. Panic sat heavy in my chest because missing even one dose makes my heart beat irregularly. But when I asked Jenna if she had seen it, she looked at me with a smirk and said, "Maybe you should learn to keep track of your things. You can't expect us to watch over you," and then walked away humming as if nothing was wrong. At first I thought maybe I misunderstood her tone. Maybe I was reading too much into her behavior. But as the hours passed and my chest started tightening, dizziness creeping in like fog, I realized something was terribly, deliberately wrong. I sat down on the couch, sweating and trembling, hoping my son would come home early from work. But he texted me that he'd be late, so I tried to stay calm, deep breaths, slow movements, but the room started spinning and I had to lie down. That's when the phone rang, and it was my doctor calling urgently, saying my pharmacy had reported an unusual refill request under my name earlier that day, made by someone who was not me. I told him I hadn't requested anything, and he said, "Mr. Lawson, someone tried to pick up your heart medication without authorization. Are you safe? Do you have your pills with you right now?" And my heart sank because the answer was no, I didn't. The doctor immediately became alarmed, insisting I call emergency services if I felt faint or short of breath. But more than his medical advice, it was the question he asked next that shook me. "Mr. Lawson, is anyone in your home preventing you from accessing your medication?" And for the first time in my life, I felt like a helpless old man, that awful feeling of being dependent on people who didn't care if I lived or died. I hung up the phone and sat there for a moment, swallowing back humiliation, until something inside me snapped, a quiet but fierce voice saying, "Enough, Henry, enough pretending everything is fine." I pushed myself up, walked slowly to Jenna and Mark's room, and opened the closet, and there, on the top shelf behind Jenna's handbag, was my medication container. She had hidden it deliberately, intentionally, cruelly. I took it and walked back into the living room. And when Jenna returned from her errands later, she looked at the bottle in my hand, eyes widening for a split second before she rolled them dramatically and said, "Oh my God, Henry, it was a joke. You need to relax. You're way too dramatic about everything." I couldn't even respond at first because her lack of guilt stunned me. She didn't just hide my medication. She justified it as a lesson, as if my life was something she could gamble with to make a point. I asked her calmly, what exactly was the lesson? And she shrugged and said, "Maybe you'll stop being so dependent on us. You act like a child. Maybe you'll finally learn to be responsible." And that was the moment something strong and unfamiliar rose in me, not anger, not fear, but clarity, pure and sharp. I told her to sit down because we needed to talk, but she laughed and said she had no time for elderly drama and that she would wait for Mark to come home. What she didn't know was that I wasn't waiting for my son. I had already made the call to my doctor, and he, deeply concerned, had reported the incident as elder endangerment. Within an hour, the police knocked on the door because in my state, tampering with medication is considered a criminal act, especially when it involves a senior citizen. Jenna turned pale when the officers asked her questions, and she kept repeating that it was just a harmless lesson, but the officers didn't see it that way. And neither did the healthcare representative who showed up to ensure my safety. When Mark finally arrived, he walked into chaos. Police in the living room, Jenna crying and yelling, and me sitting there quietly, still feeling my heartbeat jump irregularly from the missed dosage. At first, Mark defended Jenna, insisting she would never do such a thing. But when the officer presented the pharmacy report, the doctor's statement, and finally my recovered medication container found in their closet, Mark's face drained of color. He turned to Jenna and asked, "Why? Why would you do something like this?" And Jenna, instead of apologizing, screamed that I was manipulating everyone and that I needed to learn boundaries, revealing right there in front of the officers exactly how she viewed me, not as family, not as a human being, but as a burden, an obstacle, something she needed to control and correct. The officers didn't arrest her, but they gave her a stern warning and documented the incident officially, and that record was enough to force consequences I don't think she ever imagined. Mark, shaken and ashamed, apologized to me over and over. But apologies couldn't erase what had been done, and I told him gently that love doesn't survive in a house where cruelty is excused. I called my lawyer the next morning and made decisions I never thought I'd make. Jenna and Mark would no longer live with me. My home security system would be upgraded, and my will, which once included both of them, would be rewritten entirely. I wasn't doing it out of spite. I was doing it because trust is a fragile thing. And once shattered, you cannot rebuild it on top of fear. Over the next few days, Mark moved their things out, and while he begged me not to cut him off, I told him I needed time, real time, to heal from what happened. As for Jenna, she avoided me completely, embarrassed and furious that her actions were exposed. But every time I remember her words, it was just a lesson. I'm reminded of how people justify cruelty when they want control. But here's the truth I learned. Getting older doesn't make you weak, but trusting the wrong people just might. Now, I take my medication on time every morning, sitting by the kitchen window, watching the sunrise, feeling stronger than I have in years, not because of my health, but because I finally chose myself. And if there's one lesson that truly came out of this, it's this: sometimes the people you least expect will show you exactly who they are. And when they do, you must believe them and protect yourself, no matter how much you love them.